We're joined in New York by Boris Schlossberg, Director of Currency Research at GFT. Long time in the coming, hasn't it, Boris, this one?
It's been a very long time. I'm actually old enough to remember when it came the first time. Yes, it's been a long time coming, although I think it'll be very glacial in its pace. I don't anticipate this revaluation to be major in terms of a movement, probably 5% maximum at this point, given everything that they've said and given the way they've been acting recently.
Well, given their currency reserves as well, they could manage this one quite completely, couldn't they?
Yes, they could easily manage it. As a matter of fact, one of the interesting things that I read today was, which I thought was something that the market really hasn't considered, is that if they do move too rapidly in appreciating the yuan, they hold massive dollar reserves, and it would be very negative for their capital account. They would have a major depreciation on their investable assets by appreciating the yuan too far. So I think they want to be very careful at how they want to manage it. And I think the key point that many of the other analysts on your show have made is that in some ways this is also a play to the Chinese consumer. We've seen all of these strikes. We've seen all of this social unrest. And of course, the Chinese government is very, very cognizant of that problem. And they want to curtail that turmoil as soon as possible. So in some ways, this was a political move, but perhaps not the way we think of a political move to be. Not nearly to appease the United States, but much more to appease their own internal population.
Well, they're bound to do it for themselves and weren't doing this out of altruistic reasons, but there was a lot of pressure from Washington, particularly probably behind the scenes here. Nothing was going to get done if we had just Congress there shouting and screaming. Exactly. And of course, Chinese always move at their own pace. They really are very... They simply don't want to be intimidated, and they don't like to be intimidated. So, the movement here was actually quite tactical in its methods, because they did it right before the G20, and now they've taken a lot of the firepower of their critics just away from them by doing it this way. Boris, we'd already seen that the yuan, given what the dollar had done, appreciating, what, 15, 16% against the euro. So we're already getting great imbalances in terms of the way that their trade flows were going.
Yes, they were, and especially, of course, the Chinese-European trade, which is in many ways larger than Chinese-U.S. trade, was definitely getting impacted. But, in some ways, this is an interesting move by them because it's a sign of confidence. They're basically making a vote of confidence that global growth really is going to be sustainable going forward. And I think in some ways that may be a big gamble at this point. I think the G3 economies really are facing some very serious headwinds into the second half of this year. That growth will be positive, but will be probably much more muted than everybody thinks, because there's quite a lot of problems in the U.S., there's austerity problems in Europe, and the Japanese consumer is still very moribund. There's still deflationary problems in Japan. So it's going to be difficult to see how you're going to be able to reach 3% plus global growth, on which I think this whole revaluation idea rests.
And of course, pivotal to all this will be the way that the American economy actually grows too. What are the prospects there? Some people are talking about double-dip recession, and those voices actually seemingly are getting a bit louder right now, Boris.
They are. I think it's a little bit premature. I think what you can say about the American consumer right now is that everybody is spending money on sort of soft goods. Restaurants, movies, those are the things that people are spending money on. But durable goods are really, really hurting. And I think you're going to see car numbers come out. They're going to be probably more of a disappointment than the market expects, because the U.S. consumer has really not spent enormous amount of money on the durable side of it. And that is one of the reasons why I think the growth in the U.S. in the second half is going to be slower than everybody anticipates. On top of everything else, the labor numbers out of the U.S. have really been very, very tepid. We're going to have jobless claims this Thursday coming out. And again, it will probably be above 450,000 jobless claims. That's not very positive for U.S. growth.
Boris, we're out of time, but thank you so much for joining us, Boris Schlossberg there.